Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life and the man updating for projections around the clock, given the chaos going on, especially in a 16 bye week. It is John Pawson himself. How's it hanging?
Does this qualify as a bye apocalypse with 6 teams on bye?
There are two of them this year, this week and then week 13, the week before the fantasy playoffs for a lot of people, which is not good. No bye weeks in week 8. But again, the NFL does not care about your personal life.
Yeah, I think this is so if it's the most this year, then I think it qualifies as a bipocalypse. I like saying that word.
This one is also much less gruesome than week 13 when all the good offenses go on bye. And anyone who drafted kickers early, like Justin Tucker, knows that because we're in charge of waivers for our leagues. And we knew we just didn't want to pick up a kicker until week 13. So I have that going for me. I don't have to worry about that spot, at least in a lot of teams. But a lot to get to today, considering all the chaos, all the backfield shakeups that are going on, changes in usage since we have teams returning from bye weeks now. And we'll get to all of that. But before then, remember, you can still get a discount at 4for4, which is discounted already for the rest of the year. Prices have been knocked down, but you can use the promo code YouTube to get 25% off further that discount. Make it as cheap as possible for yourself. Not my call, corporate's call, but make it as cheap as possible and get in early to see everything we are discussing today. And we begin on Thursday Night Football with the Jaguars and Saints, and a game I can't get up for. The Saints missing both starting tackles. Trevor Lawrence banged up, and we think he's going to play. Calvin Ridley averaging a 15.5% target share against man coverage, which the Saints play at the league's 4th highest rate. And then, of course, Derek Carr still being one of the league's worst quarterbacks in completion rate inside the red zone, as he's been for his entire career. So let's just begin with Lawrence Paulson. Where do you have him ranked for everyone, assuming he's going to play?
I have him ranked as a low-end QB1 at 12. The Saints are 14th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So he's sort of in that range with like Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Sam Howell, and Jared Goff. Very, mediocre sort of matchups there. I think Stafford probably has the best matchup of those 4. Lawrence can run, but I don't know how much he'll run. So he might be a little bit limited in his, as far as the rushing yards are concerned. But if he plays, he's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. So, probably a safer play than Sam Howell playing the Giants, who are, they're 12th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. There's been a few games where teams just haven't had to throw on them. They had that really ugly game with the Bills last week. So, I think I trust Lawrence a little bit more than Howell this week.
And for the Jaguars passing game, running attack, it's also concentrated that it makes it simple. Even Travis Etienne, we hinted at it last week, but now he has every single role for himself. 3 games now, his past 3, that he's handled 100%, all 5 of the team's running back touches inside the 10-yard line. No one else is getting used in that department. So Etienne has every single role now. On the other side of the ball, though, for the Saints, we did see some change-ups that included Taysom Hill starting in place of Roschon Johnson as a true tight end. 13 snaps in line, 25 out wide, and then, of course, leaves with 8 targets. So where are you ranking Taysom Hill for everyone among tight ends this week?
Yeah, is this going to continue? It was the weirdest thing ever. I looked at the box score last week, and he had 6 catches at one point. I don't know if he finished with 6. He is always discounted in the as a tight end in the tight end premium because he doesn't catch passes, but now apparently he's going to start catching passes. They have Foster Moreau there. Juwan's out again, it looks like. So, I've got Hill at 22, but he could probably talk yourself into him as a streamer given this new role. I mean, I don't always trust these roles like this that have completely gone against everything that's happened in the player's career. The other issue I think with Hill is that, with Jamaal Williams back, he's unlikely to see maybe as many carries or goal line carries as he would. He still could. Jacksonville is 3rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end, so it's not the greatest matchup. I did want to mention on the Jacksonville receiver side that I do have, Ridley and Kirk a lot closer this week. I think, I might actually put Kirk ahead of Ridley, given the man coverage splits that you mentioned at the top of this segment.
And I personally think Kirk should be ranked over Ridley every week. He's been the more consistent option. Calvin Ridley's two highest target shares this season, including last week, have come against the Colts, who play the league's highest rate of zone coverage and cover 3, which Calvin Ridley has seen over 30% of his targets against. So, there are reasons why he's seen a high target share against the Colts in particular, and Kirk has just leaps and bounds earned more targets than Ridley so far in the year. And we're in week 7. Who cares about ADP? We're playing a week-to-week game now. There's no reason to hang on to name value right now. So, yes, I am of the camp that believes Kirk should absolutely be ranked over Ridley for week 7.
Sounds good. I think Evan Engram's a solid tight end as well. And then you get into the Saints backfield. I'm interested to hear your take on what you think Jamaal Williams, carry share will be in this game. He's coming off the injury. He's got a hamstring injury. The Saints have always tried to limit Alvin Kamara's touches when they can. But so far this season, it's been kind of a one-man show in that backfield. So I'm interested to see what happens with that tonight.
And they gave Jamaal Williams so much money that I doubt we see the 24 touches that Kamara has seen in each of his last 3 games now. I bet we get Jamaal Williams just pummeling into the line of scrimmage a couple times. Jaguars defense has still been pretty stout. So
yeah, they're good against the run.
They limit runs. They allow big plays, but they limit runs overall because they do have their 20th and rate of 10-yard runs against them. But overall, yes, they have limited running backs and contain them pretty well. So Jamaal Williams not really on my radar for standalone value, but does he cannibalize Kamara? I think so. Where do you have Kamara ranked?
I moved him once I got the news that Jamaal Williams is going to play, very likely to play. I moved Kamara from maybe 5 or 6 down to 11. I think he's still a solid play due to the Jaguars are kind of a pass funnel. So this could be, Derek Carr's biggest yardage game in a while. And that could trickle down to Kamara, Chris Olave, and others.
And a lot of these decisions as we move along are made for us this week. With 6 teams on bye, everyone is putting the Rams running backs content out there and sifting through it. And it's I'm, as someone who plays fantasy football, I'm in so many situations where I broke the situation down for everyone, and we'll get there eventually. But a lot of these situations just answer themselves for you because you don't have a choice. 6 teams on bye, injuries everywhere. No one ever goes over in 2023 NFL. You just play the guy. If Zach Evans gets 0 touches, whatever. I'm playing the guy because I don't have a choice. Sometimes that's the content. That's all you need to hear. Moving on, though. We'll get to that soon. Lions at the Ravens. And one that I'm hoping doesn't let me down because I want to be excited. Dropped all the way to 41.5 total. Has been bet back up to 43 because if the weather holds, and that's what I'm worried about here. Sloppy conditions projected. But if the weather holds, I think this game could be pretty fun because the Lions have created chaos on defense, but this is their first real test since they allowed 37 points to Geno Smith in overtime. In their last 4 games, they've played no one. Desmond Ridder, Jordan Love, Bryce Young, and Baker Mayfield. And the way this defense operates favors Lamar Jackson. The Lions have schemed the 4th highest rate of zone coverage. And against zone this year, Lamar has averaged a 71% completion rate for 8.7 yards per attempt. Not only that, but Zay Flowers, curious where you have him ranked, because it seems like another favorable spot for him. He's seen 55% of his targets against zone coverage and tripled his yards per route run against that compared to man coverage for 12.5 yards per catch. So pretty clear if Lamar Jackson has success, where he's going to go with the ball here.
Yeah, and Detroit is a pass funnel as well. They're number 1 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I have Gus Edwards and Justice Hill pretty low, ranked as RB3s. And, in a week where there's 6 teams on bye, that's pretty low. There's probably better options, even on the waiver wire, like a Zach Evans or Latavius Murray, in my opinion. As for Flowers, I have him at 22. He's been bouncing in that 19 to 22 range as I've been updating projections. Detroit is 23rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. Last week, he was popping in the week 6 breakout receiver model, and he found the end zone, had a good game. So I would expect another good game from him. And Lamar is going to probably have to throw the ball a little bit more than they are typically wanting to against Detroit, since they are pretty good against the Lions are pretty good against the run.
What I like about the Lions punching back in this spot too, which goes against Ryan Noonan's belief on the betting show, I know, but I view the Lions as one of the least stubborn offenses in the league. And without David Montgomery, they are not a run-first attack that they otherwise would want to be. Even last week against the Bucs front seven, they couldn't run the ball, and they instead schemed the 10th highest pass play rate from neutral game script in what was, for the most part, a one-score game throughout. And opponents this year against the Ravens have taken that same approach with the 7th highest pass play rate overall. So without Montgomery, I think we get some kick through the air. I'm curious your thoughts on the Lions backfield.
Yeah, so Jahmyr Gibbs looks like he'll be back, right? So I would expect him in the lead role, although, we probably will see more Craig Reynolds than Gibbs managers want to see. They seem to like to split this no matter who's there. Reynolds has played decent. They're actually, you look at the adjusted fantasy points allowed to the different positions, and the Ravens are actually a kind of a run funnel. But as you mentioned, the Ravens have given up a lot of pass attempts. They're 5th in the league, the defense is, in pass attempts against. And that might have to do with game script and, leading in games. But they've only allowed the second fewest passing yards per game, 163. So their yards per attempt allowed is 5.4, tied for lowest in the league with the Browns. So teams will try to pass against them. The Lions may go that route because of their issues at running back. How much success they'll have, I don't know. This Detroit offense is better than most, and they do have quite a bit of talent now with Amon-Ra St. Brown back healthy, Jameson Williams flashing last week with a big catch. Josh Reynolds has played pretty well. Sam Laporte is obviously having a great rookie season at tight end. So they do have the talent, and they do have a pretty good offensive coordinator who can scheme some yardage and some players open. So we'll see how they decide to attack it, but it actually sets up more favorably for the run game than it does the pass game based on the numbers.
I'm waiting to see if Jahmyr Gibbs gets in a full practice, because if he practices at full at any point this week, I bet we don't see Craig Reynolds at all, given that we've already seen this backfield in a game without David Montgomery this year. And in that game, remember, Jahmyr Gibbs handled 72% of the team's backfield touches, ran 20 routes to Craig Reynolds 8, out-touched Craig Reynolds 18-4. I think it's all Jahmyr Gibbs, honestly, if he gets in one full practice. If he's limited, though, throughout the week, that would then make me question his actual role in his first game back.
Yeah, having sat out 2 games, I would expect there to be a timeshare here, just because they're not fully sure of his health. But you're right, though. If he's like fully, or if they take him off the injury report, which sometimes happens,
yeah,
that certainly says he's closer to 100% than previously.
And then Jameson Williams, I still don't think you're in a position to start him. Only 9 routes, just like last year, popped up with a big catch, but wasn't being used at all. He's basically Marvin Mims at this point until otherwise noted. I don't think they're going to truly integrate him into the offense until after their bye around week 10. But where do you have him ranked for everyone who may be in a pinch?
Yeah, I mean, he's at a wide receiver 5 level just because of the playing time. So if you're going to start him, you just have to be hoping that they decide to ramp up his snaps and take snaps away from, Josh Reynolds or Khalif Raymond.
Falcons at the Buccaneers. And what's happened since week 2 is that the Falcons have trailed for a league-high amount of plays. Thus, they have been forced into the air against Arthur Smith's will for the 5th most dropbacks per game, with Desmond Ridder going over 30 pass attempts in every single one of those contests. And that's why we're suddenly getting Drake London with over a 23% target share in all but one of his games since week 2. We're getting Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith, both top 12 tight ends in points per game. And then, of course, Bijan Robinson still having his lucrative pass-catching role. And so that's what's going on here, Paulson, is that Drake London now, I think that's the big one here, is actually, I consider, a strong wide receiver 2 rest of season, as opposed to like that 5.5% target share we're so far removed from in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, every time we get on board with London or Pitts, it tends to bite us in the ass. Pardon my French, but if you're just looking at targets, I mean, these are also like targets with an asterisk because how catchable are they from Desmond Ridder? But he had 9 for 125 on 12 targets last week, 6 for 78 on 9 targets in week 5 against Houston, 3 for 28 and a touchdown. I think that was a London game on 7 targets. So he's delivered 3 usable fantasy lines in his last 3 games. He's delivered 4 usable fantasy lines in his last 5 games. So the one clunker there was week 3 against Detroit, 31 yards. And of course the goose egg in week 1. So we haven't seen a 1 target game in a while from him. He's averaging 7.2 targets per game now. So I think we are at the point where he is an every week start for most fantasy teams. And certainly in a week where you've got 6 teams on bye, I think he's solid to strong wide receiver 2. Tampa is worst, I think, in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers than they are to running backs or tight ends. So I think this is the best matchup on the field for Arthur Smith and his brilliant offense.
I am in a position in some leagues where I have to start one of Rachaad White or Keyshawn Vaughn because that's how desperate it has become. But it is not a situation we should be trying to squeeze either into our lineups. We talked about it last week, but that trend continued at their bye, with this becoming a 60-40 timeshare and thus a 0-0 timeshare in this offense. Rachaad White now, 63% of the team's backfield touches in his last 2 games. Keyshawn Vaughn right up there for 38%. So it's just a poor spot against this Falcons defense. Stout against the run, just 3.7 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. Just a miserable situation.
Last week, White had 7 carries. Vaughn had 6 carries. I mean, the only bright spot for White is that he actually rushed for 26 yards, which is almost 4 yards per carry, whereas Vaughn rushed 9 yards on 6 carries, which is absolutely brutal, 1.5 yards per carry, and White had 4 targets to Vaughn's 2. So the only reason I would start, I would pick White over Vaughn unless we got some news that Vaughn was going to get the start, but you're just banking on a game where he might get 15 touches and maybe fall into the end zone. But in a week where you've got 6 teams on bye, it's a situation you might have to start him.
For the Commanders at the Giants, I'm curious how you parse their receivers. I wrote about in the waiver column Tyrod Taylor being one of my favorite streaming options. I may even talk about him on the DFS show on Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. But the point is, this Commanders defense is absolutely dreadful. They've allowed a top 12 quarterback in every game since week 2 with the 4th most yards per attempt and the 8th highest rate of 15-yard gains through the air. Tyrod also snuck in 5 carries on Sunday night against the Bengals with a higher floor than perceived. And what we saw from their wide receivers was Brian Dable shake up the rotation entirely. It has become Darius Slayton, who has always led the team in routes run, but Darius Slayton yet again led the team in routes run, 87% of dropbacks. And then after that, Jalen Hyatt and Wan'Dale Robinson at 73%. Other than that, no one else. Isaiah Hodgins, just 11 routes. Sterling Shepard, 0 routes. Paris Campbell, healthy scratched. So we now have a strong 3 wide receiver set rotation in what should be a good spot.
Yeah, and I would favor the outside receivers over Robinson, even though he's seen the targets. Just due to this matchup with Taron Johnson in the slot, it doesn't look very good. Very low fantasy points allowed per route covered for Taron Johnson, whereas Dane Jackson, Christian Benford have been more forgiving. Certainly Dane Jackson, who primarily will line up opposite Darius Slayton, but they do move Slayton around quite a bit right and left, but he's primarily on the right side. Dane Jackson, 0.45 fantasy points per route, which is one of the higher in the league. So that's the best matchup. Robinson has been seeing the most targets, but Taylor did target Slayton a couple times in that game against the Bills, and I think there was one near miss. He's got the speed to exploit the outside there.
That is my pick if I'm desperate for a flex option anywhere. To your point, the Commanders have allowed a league high 11.7 yards per catch to opposing boundary receivers. And 60% of Slayton's targets last week against the Bills came 20 yards downfield. So he's getting the targets where it matters most for fantasy. He's seeing a majority of them there. He's in the best spot, and he is leading the team in routes run. So that's absolutely my pick. On the other side of the ball, we've also seen Terry McLaurin separate himself from Jahan Dotson of late.
By a lot. And I think we've also seen Curtis Samuel separate himself from Jahan Dotson.
Mm-hmm.
Curtis Samuel is the wide receiver 25 or something on the year. He's got a nice matchup in the slot against D. Alford. So I have a McLaurin, Samuel, and then Dotson this week. I don't know how you feel about that, but McLaurin's a low-end wide receiver too. He's getting more consistent targets. We know he's a good player. And then Samuel is getting more usage than Dotson, more consistent usage. He also runs the ball a little bit. He had the touchdown, I think, last week. So he does get targeted quite a bit in the red zone as well. So he'd be my pick as the number 2 option this week.
I was slacking our own Jen Eakins about this because you're down bad when 6 teams are on bye, you're playing the Giants, and we still can't start you. And that's Jahan Dotson, who has been under 15% of the team's targets in 4 of his last 5 games. Literally unstartable. So at this point, if you want to hold on to him, just because you may have drafted him thinking he's the breakout option, and he could be at the end of the year, but he has to have a complete role change right now. The routes don't matter. In practice, he was holding kicks as the team's primary placeholder for extra points on Thursday, because that's how far we've come. So you just can't start him. I mean, it's that simple.
You could start him in your points per held kick.
Yeah,
league.
That's the one.
He might be a wide receiver 1 in that one.
Logan Thomas also 1 target this past game, but I don't mind going back, just given 6 teams on bye. We lost some tight ends, including Dalton Schultz, who did lead the team in targets in back-to-back games. So if Logan Thomas is still on your roster, it's not really a situation where I'm terrified to start him. I'm still comfortable playing him.
Yeah, I would agree. I just mentioned that he's had a consistent role, and then last week was kind of an aberration where he didn't, he only had the 1 target.
For the Raiders at the Bears, I think we're still in waiting on the Raiders quarterback, because Brian Hoyer came off the bench, but just like last time they were in this situation against the Chargers, we don't think Hoyer will start because it doesn't make sense to throw the rookie in like under fire mid-game, whereas that's kind of Hoyer's job. So now with another week to prep, we think Aiden O'Connell will probably start in place of Jimmy Garoppolo, and it is a really good spot. Like, only Kirk Cousins this past game has failed to reach 18 fantasy points against the Bears so far this year. Like, we want our quarterbacks against the Bears. So in deeper superflex leagues, I will start Aiden O'Connell, assuming he's under center. But what are you doing with the fallout, the players around him, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers through the passing game?
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I have Hoyer in the, because I thought that him coming in relief would indicate that he's going to start, but I think you make some sense about how he probably had a much better equipped to come in mid-game and do decent than O'Connell, and that if they want to see what O'Connell can do with a week of practice, I'm going to keep an eye on that.
We didn't get a fair look at O'Connell in week 4. Khalil Mack just stayed in the backfield for 6 sacks, whereas like this time, I mentioned the Bears matchup for fantasy, but also their 21st in pressure rate. If it's O'Connell, I think it's a pretty good spot, honestly.
Yeah, Bears, Raiders. This is one where you probably want the defenses the most of any of the team, any of the players. It's been interesting to see Devontae Adams sort of, I wouldn't call it a fall from grace. He still is playing an excellent. He's had some big games. I think he's frustrated with the situation right now. I can't blame him. He went to Vegas to play with his old college teammate, and they summarily dismissed Derek Carr and after the year. And now he's dealing with Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell and Brian Hoyer as his quarterbacks. And he's also dealing with a target pinch with Jacoby Myers playing very well. We knew he was an emerging receiver in New England last year, and that was a good signing by Vegas to bring him over. So it's just not the Devontae 12 plus targets every week like we've been seeing. And we can hope that the passing game does well. But with this quarterback change, we just don't have a ton of confidence. So I think he's being bumped down from like 5 or 4 or 5 range down to 8 or 9. Devontae is, while Myers is at, low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3.
I think Adams has still been dealing with that ankle injury he suffered a couple weeks ago too. Like Devonta Smith and Chris Olave, these guys are still out here for a route on every drop back basically, but I think they're playing through injury, honestly, and that's what's been happening with Adams. You talked about emerging though, and that's what leads me to Michael Mayer in a sweet spot against this Bears defense, allowing a top 3 amount of fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Mayer, the trend continued this past week after leading Austin Hooper in routes run just 2 weeks ago. This week, 67% route rate, 19% target share, led the team in receiving yards. And as Adams continues to be, in my opinion, banged up, this team has needed a second receiver to emerge, and that is certainly Michael Mayer. So I'm quite high on Michael Mayer. I'll be playing him as a low-end tight end 1. What about your ranking?
Yeah, he's moved up in the rankings. Obviously, started the season as Austin Hooper's backup, and over the last 3 weeks, we've seen steady increase in usage and steady increase in snaps played to a point where he was playing more snaps than Hooper last week, and has had some good games here the last couple weeks. So yeah, Mayer I would have as a mid-range to high-end tight end 2 this week.
On the other side of the ball, Tyson Bagent, under center, undrafted D2 quarterback from Shepherd University, came in for relief of Justin Fields dealing with his finger injury, and he played exactly as you expected. Fumble 6, a egregious interception, throwing it downfield on 1st and 10 when they were within 1 score of their opponent. But I don't know what to do with DJ Moore. Like, I'm in a situation where I think I should be benching him for Jordan Addison and a handful of others. So where do you have him ranked?
Yeah, I mean, you could make that case. He did get, I think, 4 targets on 10 pass attempts from Bagent. So I think they
quote unquote targets. Yes.
Yeah, I think he did complete 3 or 4 of them. So I don't have the stat head sheet pulled up here, but after looking at that, I wasn't as concerned about Moore. I mean, it isn't particularly great matchup. I have him at wide receiver 15. Vegas is 6th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think this is a game that Vegas will try to control on the ground and kind of drain this clock and use Josh Jacobs a lot early and often and just try to do long drives. So that might limit the Bears offense's opportunities. Certainly if Fields out, it's a big downgrade for DJ Moore. I have him at 15, but I mean, you're looking at the guys below him, Marquise Brown, nice matchup against Seattle. Tyler Lockett, nice matchup against Cardinals. Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, McLaurin, Kirk. Those guys you could all make a case for over DJ Moore given this quarterback change.
Talk about running the clock out too. I mean, Jacobs is so worn down by last year's 390 touches. You can tell he's wearing on his bones. 2.9 yards per carry, no juice, and even the best of matchups. So just another player you keep playing because he's seeing 90% of the team's backfield touches, but zero faith of a ceiling here. Like, man, it's been miserable. And for their backfield, what we saw was a timeshare in the first half without Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson, who even as of Thursday, I'm not expecting to play. He's still in concussion protocol. We're talking 2 weeks later. And even by the sounds of the coachings, when they were interviewed about it, didn't sound promising for him. So I'm expecting Roschon to be out of this game. And if that's the case, I don't know if I have any faith here. Darrington Evans out-touched Deontay Foreman 7-6. When Bagent came in the game, that's when Foreman saw 10 of his 15 carries because they were just trying to hide Bagent under center. Like, they didn't want him getting the ball. So unless you have thoughts on this backfield, like, I don't know what to do with it except avoid it.
Well, I think that if Roschon Johnson is indeed out, and as you mentioned, as of today, he's still in the concussion protocol.
Which is 2 weeks removed from when he suffered it.
Yeah. So, I mean, normally we knock him out. That's bad phrasing. Normally we remove him or a player from the rankings the following week for sure, and then they're usually back 2 weeks later, and now we're getting worried. He needs to get involved in practice here quickly. I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm going to take him out of the rankings today. Foreman's going to move up. I mean, I think into, especially this week, He's at 22 right now. Vegas is 27th just to fantasy points allowed to the position. I think there'll be a run-heavy game plan given the quarterback situation. They should have some. A.J. Dillon had his best game against the Raiders.
Says a lot.
Yeah. So I think Donta Foreman can provide serviceable running back 2 type numbers this week.
Bills at the Patriots. Patriots being 8-point home dogs. And what we've seen is that Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs have had no issues, just drowning Belichick and the Patriots defense. Allen, multiple touchdowns in 4 consecutive starts against New England. And their last 5 matchups, Stephon Diggs' worst performance was 51 receiving yards. Like, still got home with a touchdown on 3 of 5 and over 80 receiving yards in those games. And that's kind of where the ball goes. No one has questions about the Bills' passing game. What we're really seeing is their running backs being a timeshare. James Cook still hasn't handled over 60% of the team's backfield touches in more than 1 game since week 1. It was as we talked about last week, 50, 25, 25 share. But with Damian Harris now dealing with this unfortunate neck injury, it's become more 50-50, 60-40 in James Cook. So if someone's in a pinch, I'm curious where you have Latavius Murray ranked, because I think you can legitimately start him this week.
You absolutely can legitimately start him. It was the touch ratio last week was 14-12.
Yeah,
that's what Damian Harris playing 1 snap and getting injured with 1 touch. So it looks like Murray is getting all of Harris's work, and that's putting him into more of a 50-50 type timeshare. The snaps were dead even, 49% each for James Cook and Latavius Murray. So I do have James Cook higher. I've got him at 21, but I think that's a little bit lower than consensus this week. And I've got Murray at 30, which makes him a, RB3 flex option this week. Probably, I don't know where we're at with Cook's goal line carries, but I would think, the odds on favorite to get a rushing touchdown inside the 10 is probably Latavius Murray.
And even last week against the Giants, it went nowhere. But before the half, he did receive all 3 carries at the goal line for the Bills. For the Patriots, I think it's actually pretty simple. Like, Kendrick Bourne popped up last week with that 35% target share because Juju Smith-Schuster and Demario Douglas were out. There was nowhere else to go with the ball. Also, for their tight ends, Hunter Henry, banged up, limited or not practicing the last time I saw on Wednesday. And so if Henry's out, if those 2 receivers are out, it's very clear, like, if you're desperate, you go to Mike Gesicki and Kendrick Bourne. Otherwise, as Kendrick Bourne has shown us since week 1, it's just hard to trust him weekly. Like, you don't need to get there. But for their running backs, assuming Rhamondre Stevenson plays, where do you have him ranked, since him and Zeke are still playing just enough to annoy us with Rhamondre?
Rhamondre, I have him as a, solid RB2 in a short week. Buffalo is still getting gashed on the ground. I think it's 5-point-something yards per carry. It was over 5.4 yards per carry, 134 yards rushing allowed per game. So that's the way to beat them if you're going to try to keep it close to beat them. Saquon Barkley had a rough start to that game, but then broke a couple of big runs on an important drive for the Giants to keep that game close. That's the way they could try to win. As far as Bourne, I do think that whenever he's gotten the opportunities in terms of snaps, he has typically delivered. He's averaging 4.9 catches for 60 yards and 0.3 touchdowns on 7.3 targets per game in the last 10 games where he's played at least 75% of the snaps. It's just been, his career has been one of these up and down in terms of playing time situations. But as you mentioned, they're just so banged up at receiver that he is very likely to play 80+% of the snaps this week and see another 6-7+ targets. And that makes him viable, I think, in this game.
Browns at the Colts. And we at least have enough confidence in PJ Walker if you were to start. Deshaun Watson limited and throwing on Thursday, so we'll have to see. Either way, an amazing spot for Amari Cooper. Even if it's Walker, just last week, Amari Cooper 24.2% target share. Remember, from Deshaun Watson, Cooper was leading the team with a 35% target share. Elijah Moore just behind him at 33%. No one else mattered in that case. Even David Njoku was down to only 11% of the team's targets from Watson. And now it's this Colts defense that has allowed one, and on 2 occasions, 2 different wide receivers to score at least 13 PPR points in every game this year. So no matter who's under center, I think the point is we're loading up on the Browns receivers and having confidence.
Yeah, and I think what we saw last week was that Cooper and Walker have a good enough rapport that we can trust Cooper out there. He's got a nice matchup with Julius Brents as well. The Colts are a secondary that we've been targeting this year, so I think it's a good spot for him. I have it ranked as a solid wide receiver too.
The Browns' backfield, a timeshare out of their bye. Even on the first drive, Kareem Hunt out-touched Jerome Ford 3-1. At the end of the day, Jerome Ford, 19 touches, Kareem Hunt, 15, Ford, 14 routes, Hunt, 13. So a true timeshare. But now, last I saw on Wednesday, Kareem Hunt banged up, not practicing. So we may get a full Jerome Ford performance here. Where do you have those two ranked?
I have Ford as a low end RB1. I have Hunt, if he plays, ranked as a high end RB2. It was for Hunt managers, it was nice to see him get that sort of workload, and they're starting to do a timeshare with him and Ford. But if he's banged up or out, then I think you can look at Ford as a solid RB1 in terms of volume. The Colts are 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think with Hunt out, would be his touch floor would be very high.
The Colts also an interesting situation because we saw the pendulum swing back in the favor of Jonathan Taylor, as we expected 42 million later. And after out touching Taylor 25-7 in their first game together, Zack, Moss, and Taylor instead split touches 50-50. How are you parsing this backfield against this menacing Browns defense that has literally allowed the fewest yards from scrimmage of any unit since 1971?
Well, I think we're seeing a shift towards Taylor that probably will continue. I don't think that Zack Moss just goes away. He's probably going to be more annoying as the backup as far as Taylor managers are concerned than anybody they've had there in the past. Moss has played very well, so there's no reason to give Jonathan Taylor 25, 30 touches per game. But we went into last week against the 49ers wondering if the Browns defense was for real. And I think we've got an answer that they are a strong unit. So this is not a defense that I would be targeting as a fantasy manager, although, the Colts run the ball pretty well. The game's at home. I could see Taylor getting there with, 60 yards, 80 yards total and a touchdown potentially, but this could be a grind.
And it's tough for their wide receivers here. I thought Gardner Minshew was shaving points in the first half. He looked so terrible. Also, the Browns allowing a league low receiving yards per game to opposing slot receivers. So we have this 21% target share for Josh Downs from Minshew instead of Anthony Richardson, but I don't have any amount of faith in it this week at all. Any notes on the Colts wide receivers before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, Pittman is downgraded due to this matchup. The Browns are number 1 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers, which is not a huge surprise. And that kind of puts like a fringe option like Downs into the wide receiver 5 type rankings, because we just, there's just not going to be a ton of passing yardage available. Gardner Minshew hasn't looked particularly good. He's unlikely to tear it up this week. So the one guy you can maybe count on is Pittman in terms of a dart throw because of the number of targets he's likely to see. But don't have a lot of confidence in Downs or any of the other pass catchers for the Colts.
Steelers at the Rams. And what everyone wants to hear is how you are ranking the Rams running backs this week between Zach Evans, Darrell Henderson, who's not even on the active roster yet, Myles Gaskin, and Royce Freeman.
It's a good matchup. That's how you can talk yourself into it. Zach Evans is the next guy up, quote unquote. Sean McVay has a tendency to ride his RB1 in terms of lead back touches and not really spread things out amongst multiple people. Does he trust him? I don't know. He's been the one that's been with the team and been active and This is a good matchup for him. I have him ranked as an RB3 just on hope that the trends sort of continue, that the next man up is the guy there, and that he sees the bulk of the touches and in a nice matchup against Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh defense is kind of overrated, in my opinion, in terms of fantasy-wise. Like, they give up a lot of points all over the field.
To your point, a Rams running back has handled 71% of the team's backfield touches in every game since week 2. That's been Kyren Williams to this point, but we think one player is going to be used. The issue is that, one, they lack a ceiling anyways. The last 2 weeks with Cooper Kupp back in the mix, the Rams have targeted their running backs at a league-low 5.5% rate. No one's going to earn targets here anyways. So already temper your expectations. But Zach Evans, his one issue in college too, and he was a superstar prospect, 5-star prospect, committed to Georgia initially before backing out and going to TCU. Ended his last year in college at Ole Miss, was all over the place, so the metrics never really showed anything. But the one thing he did terribly was what Kyren Williams and Darrell Henderson understand, and that's pass pro. So I already don't think they have a ceiling, because you have to be used in the passing game to have any amount of ceiling. Ask the Ravens running backs. But if Evans is also not going to be in there in pass pro, and even when Sean McVay was asked about it, he talked about Darrell Henderson. He had one line that I can't shake, and he just said that he gets his nose in there in pass protection and gets dirty. And that told me, like, Evans isn't playing on passing snaps at all either. Not that he would see the targets anyways, but he's not going to be in there. So if that's the case, my guess, and that's all it is, my educated guess is that Zach Evans leads in touches, and I have to start him because we have 6 teams on bye. Royce Freeman is a special teamer, and Darrell Henderson is familiar with the scheme. Maybe Myles Gaskin is familiar with the scheme since he was poached from Kevin O'Connell's practice squad, and those ties run deep since Kevin O'Connell came from Sean McVay. But Myles Gaskin's not a player I'm trusting this week. I would say this week it's Zach Evans leading in touches. What that amounts to, I don't know, but I have to start him.
And
that's
yeah, I think the interesting thing to see will be who is active amongst Henderson and Gaskin, because we think it'll be Evans and Freeman for sure. But so that gives you the highest floor probably with Evans. But he, would it be shocking if they just brought Darrell Henderson in and he saw 15 touches? I mean, I wouldn't be super surprised. But to have somebody come off the street and see that sort of workload when Evans has been in the fold this whole time, it would be surprising.
The real answer is the Rams passing game. Like, that's the answer.
Probably, yeah.
Because the Steelers, you already said, they are creating enough pressure to maybe make this game a little bit scarier for Matthew Stafford, because he's been such a different quarterback when he's been under pressure. 8 yards per attempt from a clean pocket, and the Steelers are 8th in creating pressure. But they're allowing a league-high 146 receiving yards to opposing slot receivers, where Cooper Kupp has seen 35% and 43% of the team's targets since returning, and they're also allowing big plays. Like, they're allowing the 7th highest rate of 15-yard gains through the air, and that would have been even higher if the Ravens didn't drop 4 touchdowns and make that number look lower. So Stafford can have a lot of success because this Steelers defense is not good outside of TJ Watt. And that's kind of the point everyone gets lost in. So it's one of only 2 totals on the board, the Eagles-Dolphins being the other, where it's actually increased this week. And I think it's because the Rams shouldn't have any issues moving the ball.
Yeah, he's got Cooper Kupp back. That's number one. Puka is good as well. Good option. Higbee's solid. So looking at the running game, and if it doesn't get going right away with with Evans or whoever else, then they're just going to go to a pass. They might be pass heavy from the start of this game.
On the other side of the ball, what are you doing with Najee Harris, the RB 46 in points per game, and Jaylen Warren, who has outscored Najee Harris in PPR leagues in literally every game they've played?
The Rams are a tough matchup. They're second in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back, so I don't have either player high. Najee continues to see carries, but as you mentioned, Jaylen Warren has been the pass catcher and scoring more in PPR. So they're very close in half PPR, 26 for Harris and 28 for Warren. But those two could easily, they're just very close in the projection. So those two could easily be flipped if you have both. You're
probably in a position too, with 6 teams on bye, to start George Pickens, but definitely concerned. 15.5% target share in week 1. Diontae Johnson coming back at full strength, and I don't have any issues throwing Diontae Johnson right back in there as a wide receiver 2, as we thought, because his recovery matched up perfectly with the team's bye week. 4 games on IR, and then 2 weeks afterwards. So he's had 6 weeks to recover. Throwing Diontae Johnson in there, and I definitely think he leads George Pickens in targets. What I'm really looking for is, will George Pickens' role change or stay the same since he was used in more elaborate ways? His route tree was much more expansive without Diontae Johnson. Will he just go back to useless go routes and having to score a touchdown to get there in fantasy? That's what I'll be looking at for these receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I have Pickens higher just because Deontay's coming off the break. I do see your point about the bye week and that he should be fully healthy. I think the one problem with Diontae Johnson is with Kenny Pickett is that he just hasn't caught touchdowns with him. Whereas Pickens has been a good red zone and touchdown option for him. So that's why I've got him a little bit higher.
Cardinals at the Seahawks. And as the Rams showed us last week, even though it could have been better because both Puka and Tyler Higbee dropped touchdowns, but you could do whatever you want against this Cardinals defense, which makes the Seahawks offense so exciting. And the one keynote that I mentioned in the waiver podcast, for those that didn't listen, and if you did, you're welcome to hear me repeat myself, it's that the Seahawks came out of the bye as a 3-wide set passing team. Before the bye, 24th in 11 personnel usage, 25th in passing from 11 personnel. Out of the bye, 10th in 11 personnel and 12th in passing from 3-wide sets. That's why Jackson Smith-Njigba, although it didn't show in the box score, just a 13.8% target share, he ran a route in a season-high 78% of dropbacks. And now it's this spot where the Cardinals are allowing a league-high 10.5 yards per catch to opposing slot receivers where he's led the team. And so I think as early as this week, you can plug in Smith-Njigba as a flex. You can start Geno Smith as a QB1. Everyone seems to be getting there in this spot.
Yeah, I'm taking maybe I'm cursing myself here, but I'm taking the Seahawks in my survivor pool, the BetSperts survivor pool. We'll see. I'm still alive, so I'm fortunate to be still alive there. But yeah, he came out with his best game out of the bye. Jackson Smith-Njigba, 4 for 48, 5 targets. He did have 6 targets the week before the bye, but only three catches for 5 yards. So just the ADOT wasn't there for him. But this is probably a get right game for Geno Smith, maybe a put up or shut up type game for him. He needs to have a good one here against the Cardinals. They're 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. I think they're 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, 31st actually. So, and the game's at home as well. They have to win this game. So I expect a good passing outing. And I also think that, Kenneth Walker is also a good start. Arizona's 29th in adjusted. Like there's some teams that are pass funnels or run funnels. Is an everything funnel for the Cardinals. So you can start everybody against them. And Walker, Geno Smith, Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Jackson Smith-Njigba if you're desperate.
Out of the bye too, like Quentin Johnston, a post-bye rookie dip. The bump doesn't exist in 2023 because Kenneth Walker, 22 of 26 backfield touches over Zach Charbonnet, who could still be used in garbage time here if you're that desperate. On the other side of the ball too, it just sucks because Josh Dobbs was such a good story through the first month of the season, but he's become a pumpkin now these last 2 games. 56% completion rate, 9 of 28 on throws 10 yards downfield these past 2 weeks. So really, like, when we play Marquise Brown, the targets aren't even efficient, but when you see 31% of them since week 2, you just kind of roll these guys out there.
Yeah, you're hoping, I guess, for vintage Dobbs, early season Dobbs here, and a pretty nice matchup against Seattle. They are a pass funnel, the Seahawks are, so I think there will be more pass attempts available here for Dobbs, for Marquise Brown, Michael Wilson. I think Marquise Brown is a solid wide receiver 2. I think Wilson is in that wide receiver 4. You might want to start him as a flex type play. Rondale Moore is just his usage has been a little bit up and down, but I think Brown certainly is startable. Wilson is kind of a dart throw. And I think Dobbs in a game where they're going to have to throw, I think, due to what we said about the Seahawks offense putting up some points, I think Dobbs is viable as a QB2 streamer.
And Honestly, if you had to pick one to start, I go back to Amari Mercado among their backfield because, again, they are 8-point dogs. We think they're going to pass, and Mercado ran 26 routes to
He did.
Ingram's and Damian Williams combined 14. Outsnap both of them as well. Like, the usage, the touches do not show his usage under the hood. So if I had to pick one in this spot, it is for me Mercado, although that means none of them get there.
Yeah, I mean the routes are nice if you're in a point per route league.
Yeah.
But he had
Routes
one
don't pay my bills. Yes, I agree.
he had one target on all those routes, but I did want to pull up the receiving stats just to see what Seattle they're middle of the road in terms of yards allowed to running backs in the passing
They're getting
game.
better
Yeah.
too. Like you mentioned them as a pass funnel, yes, but for those first few games, remember Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, who looks back at full strength. He looks awesome now on the other boundary. They're getting healthier, so they make me a little more concerned through the air outside of the middle of the field.
Yeah, Keontae Ingram saw 12 touches, Damian Williams 9, but as you mentioned, Mercado led the team in snaps, 43%, but only saw the 3 targets and all those routes, a routes route. So he's getting the wind sprints in.
Bounce back weeks for Deonta and Amari Mercado. Chargers at the Chiefs. Cross your fingers that 2023 does not fail us altogether. We need this game to be good. Justin Herbert has averaged 24 fantasy points in his last 4 games against the Chiefs under Brandon Staley, and not one of those games was decided by more than 6 points. My only concern is that since the Chiefs got Chris Jones back in week 2, it's their defense that has stood out among their offense. Only 13.4 points per game allowed in that span. If you look at the advanced metrics, second best in EPA per play and drop back success rate in limiting opposing quarterbacks, and the third highest rate of pressures that they've converted into sacks. Also, the Chargers offense, a lot of big plays left on the field, but really, they've been bad. They've been unable to pass downfield without Mike Williams. Only a 2-game sample, but 28th in yards per play. Herbert, these past 2 weeks, 1 of 8 on throws 20 yards deep, just 57% of his passes completed in that time. So I'm crossing my fingers, Paulson. We need a good game. I believe in Josh Palmer, these ancillary options for the Chargers, but I'm worried.
Yeah, they're 7th in. I was looking at the AFPA. They're 7th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. Keenan Allen, you start him, you don't even question it. But Palmer as like a fringe option is a little bit less appealing to me. But he did drop a deep. He caught one. I think he was 4 for 77 last week, but he could have been. I think he dropped one, unless that was the week before, a deep ball as well. But he's still well ahead of Quentin Johnson. We're not seeing any pressure there on Palmer's usage. So he's certainly the number 2 receiver in this offense. I think Gerald Everett is a viable tight end streamer as well. I mean, the one thing you can sort of hang your hat on or hope happens is that the Chiefs are able to score points on this defense, which, the Chargers defense is a little sketchy, jump out to a lead and, get Herbert into a very pass heavy type environment.
And for the Chiefs, it is easy as well because even with Kadarius Toney scoring a touchdown last week, Rashee Rice led him in fantasy points and had his routes increase to 60% from the time Justin Watson was injured. Remember, Rice was only running around 31% of dropbacks through week 5. So we think it very clearly goes to Rashee Rice and then, of course, Travis Kelce, who we keep trying to pinpoint Kelce's regression here, but once again, averaging 3.3 more points per game than next closest tight end. No one else matters. We're all just living in Kelce's world.
Yeah, and he's got a new girlfriend too, I heard.
Haven't heard that.
Yeah, she's a successful person. So good for him. Yes, to underline your point on Rashee Rice, he posted 4 for 72 on 4 targets, ran the second most routes after MVS last week. He's averaging 2.75 yards per route run, which is easily the team high. Watson was second with 1.71. He's running most of his routes out of the slot. So I don't know how much the Watson injury is going to affect him other than the fact that they just may be like, okay, we need to get him on the field more because he's our most productive receiver. He's got the second highest yards per route run by 2019 or 2023 rookie behind only Marvin Mims. So there you go. I think Rice is a solid wide receiver 3. I've got him at 33 this week. I don't know that I would trust any other player in this receiving core. Obviously Travis Kelce, but any other receiver, I don't know. I don't see anybody else that I'd want to start. I think Rice is the play.
I mean, imagine starting MVS or Kadarius Toney. How down bad do you have to be to get to those guys?
I mean, if you're in a point per, win sprint, MVS is up there.
He's available. He's certainly available. Packers at the Broncos. The line has moved a lot. Broncos now a 1-point home underdogs. And curious where you have Aaron Jones ranked. Limited week. Not sure if you've heard anything else on if we think he's going to be actually healthy or just fake healthy like the last game we saw him.
Well, coming off the bye, I feel like he's got to be there. I think it's trending the right way. He has the best matchup in the league. Denver is 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So in a short week, I have him at RB 13, right below Jerome Ford and ahead of Brian Robinson. It's kind of a wish ranking right now. We'll see if he, it'd be nice to see him and get a full practice in tomorrow. But we'll see. AJ Dillon, if Jones is out, AJ Dillon will move into, the RB2 ranks just out of volume and matchup play. And he did pretty well against Vegas in a nice matchup, that Monday Night Football game. So that's where I'm at with him. Jordan Love, I have him at 9. He might need to be down below Stafford just from a floor standpoint, but Denver is 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So this is a good spot for the Packer passing game if they can get things back on track.
Christian Watson and Luke Musgrave are the two I have the most faith in. Broncos allowing a 76% completion rate on throws 10 yards downfield. And Watson, who we haven't even seen at full strength yet before the bye, he's already seen 7 of his 11 targets 10 yards downfield. So everything kind of matches and the stars align for Watson in this matchup. And Luke Musgrave, the route participation down the past time we saw him, but remember, he was benched for a couple series for running the wrong route, I believe it was, against the Raiders. So if we're getting back up to this, full-time spot against this Broncos defense, top 3 and points allowed to opposing tight ends, then yeah, I'm confident with Musgrave in this game too.
Yeah, their 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends are the Broncos. So they're bad in like a lot of facets of defense. The Packer offense should be a lot better. And I don't know how concerned you are. You mentioned Watson. I looked at his matchup. He's got Patrick Surtain probably shadowing him. Does that worry you at all? Surtain hasn't been like shut down quality this year. And really all the matchups are pretty good when you just look at the pure numbers. It's just kind of a name recognition with Surtain as a shadow. You don't worry about that with Watson?
Anytime someone mentions Surtain, I would just tell them to pull up Robbie Anderson burning him for a 70-yard touchdown from Mike White whenever the Broncos play the Dolphins.
Okay.
It's like that's the only film on cornerbacks I need to see is that he couldn't contain Robbie Chosen or whatever the hell his name is.
His name is, yeah. All right, sounds good. But I think Dobbs is a viable play as well. And if you're really desperate, Jaden Reed, I think the passing game should get back on track for the Packers. We'll see. I
think Judy is the play on the Broncos side of the ball, just given that they're trying to feature him to trade him, but he's still, he's not getting there at all. So they're actually losing value when they play him more. But given how the Packers have seeded receiving yards, in particular in the slot, I think Judy's the play there. But how do you have those guys ranked?
I've just been fading Judy all year, and it seems to be working out. So I'm not going to wish rank him any higher. I think Sutton's the best receiver there. Maybe Mims is number 2. The whole Steve Smith thing with Jerry Jeudy was pretty comical last week. I don't know if his confidence is shook or if he's going to come out and play great. But the matchups, I don't know. Keyshawn Nixon has allowed the fewest points per route covered. He plays 94% in the slot. So I would like to get with you offline and figure out where there's a disparity between the Packer slot performance defensively. Jair Alexander is obviously the biggest name there. Rasul Douglas is pretty solid too. So Sutton and Brandon Johnson and Marvin Mims theoretically have tough matchups, but the numbers are saying the opposite. They're saying that Nixon is the best cover corner right now.
And we did see Samaje Perine eliminated from this backfield with both Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin healthy. And if you look at all the advance rates too, like basically only Devon Achane has been more explosive than McLaughlin this year. He earns and he deserves more touches. And so with Perine out of the mix now, I have a little more confidence starting Javonte and McLaughlin in this matchup just for the touches.
And you're saying he's out of the mix because of his role being shrunk down to 17% snaps and 2 touches. I mean, yeah, you're looking. McLaughlin actually got the start, which I thought was interesting, but he finished with 1 less touch, 1 fewer touch than Javonte. He had 2 catches though for 12 yards. Javonte ran pretty well, 5.2 yards per carry. This is I think a viable spot for both Javonte and Jaleel McLaughlin. The Packer rush defense has been bad all year and will probably continue to be bad. So these guys are viable RB2, RB3 flex plays this week, both of them, Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. And McLaughlin, I think, is the more explosive of the two, although Williams did look good last week.
Dolphins at the Eagles Sunday night. Again, please don't let us down. Don't ruin my confidence anymore that I have in football this year. And I think it's an amazing bounce back spot for the Eagles. The Jets forced Josh Allen into his worst game of the year in the season opener. They held Patrick Mahomes to his fewest passing yards so far this season with 2 picks. And then, of course, turned the Eagles one-dimensional last week and stumped Jalen Hurts for 3 interceptions. Whereas the Dolphins' defense is not that. They've been miserable. 34 points to Justin Herbert, 40 points to Josh Allen, over 40. So we think Jalen Hurts in this passing game bounced back in a tremendous way, and it's concentrated. A.J. Brown, who has separated from Devonta Smith, though we're still playing him, and DeAndre Swift even, who's popped up for 20 targets the past 3 games. So your thoughts on the Eagles' passing attack?
I think they're going to need it. The Dolphins are going to throw the ball on the Eagles. The Eagles are a pass funnel. I think the Dolphins can score very quickly, and they obviously score a lot of points. So this should be a high-scoring game. The total's at 52. The Eagles are going to need their passing game. I think Jalen Hurts is set up well. I think A.J. Brown set up well. This could be a bounce-back game for Devonta Smith as well. Dallas Goedert has a good matchup. Miami's 27th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So I think I would be starting all these Eagles, including DeAndre Swift. I mean, Miami is 26th against running backs as well. So this is a good spot for all of them.
And on the Dolphins side of the ball, if Jeff Wilson were active, any thoughts on where you would rank him?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your take as well. I think we were both coming into the season noticing the trend of when Wilson was healthy and Mostert was healthy, that Wilson was the slight favorite in the backfield for touches. Mostert's obviously having a monster season. Wilson coming back off of injury. Certainly in the first game back, I want to see where things are at. I wouldn't rank Wilson very high in his first game back. This is also a bad matchup for Miami. We'll see if their running game is immune to bad matchups or resistant to bad matchups with what they are able to do with all their speed on their offense. I still have Mostert quite high because I have faith in the running game, but I don't think Wilson comes off of IR and immediately sees 10, 12 touches. I mean, it could happen, but I think they probably want to ease him in and see how he's doing. With the way Mostert is playing, I don't think that they want to take him off the field too much if they can avoid it.
And even teams know you can't run into the heart of the Eagles' front seven. They're facing the league's lowest run play rate. Teams are only passing and getting the volume against Philadelphia. So I think that's how the Dolphins attack and have immense success. But that also is great for Raheem Mostert, who doesn't need to get there in the rushing game. Like, he can very well get there as the team's primary pass catching back too. So I'm in a situation where, like, if I need to start Jeff Wilson, if he's active, I think he may be like 60-40 in his first game back in a tough matchup, but not hoping to go there.
Yeah, I mean, he's ranked in an area with, Craig Reynolds, for me anyway, Gus Edwards, A.J. Dillon, Tyler Algier. I mean, these are guys that could probably see 10, 12 touches, but they're in better matchups, except for Gus Edwards, than Jeff Wilson. I think It'll be interesting to see Miami if they decide just to go pass heavy or if they do test out the running game, because their scheme is a little different than what Philly has been seeing for the most part.
Vikings at the Niners, rounding it out on Monday Night Football. And let's begin with the Niners backfield. And it's just the worst situation possible because I don't think we're going to know anything until Saturday morning, Sunday night. And our decisions are going to come down to the wire on Monday evening because it sounds like Christian McCaffrey is trying to play and may play. And if he does, there's a chance he's even limited, though we can't bench McCaffrey if he plays. So really the question is then, what are you doing with Jordan Mason and Eli Mitchell, who I think are just 1A, 1B? Like I can't even imagine parsing them because I think they're just like in a timeshare.
This is a tough one looking at it because I think you expected Mitchell coming back last week back into his RB2 role, but he wasn't. McCaffrey did miss some time. Mason ended up 5 carries for 27 yards and a touchdown. Mitchell 2 carries for -3 yards. Mason out-snapped Mitchell 24% to 11%, 15-7 in pure snaps. So I would just right now give a nod to Mason, and that the fact that he did produce last week and Mitchell did not just gives him the right to first touch. This is a pretty good running game. He looked pretty good as well. So I don't know that there's a whole lot of talent disparity between Mason and Mitchell. Mitchell has been excellent when he has had the opportunity to be the RB1 for San Francisco, but just coming off the injury, given what they did last week with him, it just seems like Mason's a little bit ahead. And you mentioned it as an RB1A, RB1B situation. That might be the case. It might be the case by the time that Mitchell has a full week of of recovery and reacclimation to the offense. But he out-touched him 5-2 and double up his snaps. So it looks to me like Mason is the RB1 and Mitchell is the RB2.
Just to add further context to it, Shanahan did address that, and he said Mitchell came back and practiced late last week on Thursday, so he got really one true day of practice in, and that's why Mason got the first nod once Christian came out. But he also continued and said Mason has earned more touches given his play too, because these last 2 games with Mitchell out, Mason averaged 6.4 yards per carry and scored 2 touchdowns. So that's why I think the worst thing that could happen for everyone is Christian McCaffrey play, because there's a great chance he would still be limited and it would be a 3-headed timeshare. And that's not going to get anyone there.
Well, if it's you're still starting McCaffrey, and I think if he's getting 15, 17 touches, he could get there. Mason and Mitchell, I just don't think you could count on if McCaffrey's healthy or semi-healthy.
I'm in leagues where if McCaffrey's out, I'm starting both of them. That's how desperate I am. I don't even care. I think it's going to be a timeshare. I can't pick who's going to get the goal line role, the pass catching role, the majority of touches. I'm just starting both of them. And I'm trying to get this backfield all together. No need to talk about the passing game. Like, we know exactly what's going on here. George Kittle, whack-a-mole every week. You know what you're getting into, but you still start him every week because once every 6 games, there's a 30-point burger that you have to play. So just keep on starting him. And Deebo Samuel, we are not expecting to play, correct?
Yeah, and I think George Kittle is a little more if the 49ers have a whole week to prepare for no Deebo, I think Kittle becomes a bigger part of the game plan.
Sure.
I think you would like to see as a Kittle manager when Deebo goes out that Kittle immediately picks it up, but that's not what happened last week. But I think with Deebo likely out, the other player you could start as a sneaky start is Juwan Jennings. Who kind of steps in and plays more snaps, sees more targets. Ayuk's a must play. I've got him at 6 against the Vikings on the fast track and the dome. They're 26 adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. It'll be interesting to see how Brock Purdy plays without Deebo and perhaps without McCaffrey.
And as you mentioned, we did see it last year. So probably a full week will make the difference for Kittle. But last year without Deebo, that 5-game stretch was Kittle leading the team with a 24.5% target share, leading the league in receiving touchdowns.
Tons of touchdowns, yeah.
Yeah. And scoring 17.7 PPR points per game. So that's probably the difference if Deebo is out. And on the other side of the ball, our first matchup we saw without Justin Jefferson, an offense that lacked any amount of pop whatsoever. Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne tied each other with 5 targets each. TJ Hawkinson's role didn't change at all. He had a 6.5 depth of target coming into that game. He averaged a 7.5 depth of target. Still getting the volume, so he scores his floor, but just 0 ceiling. He has to score a touchdown. Otherwise, like, you're only playing him for these receptions, which is miserable in half PPR. And then Alexander Madison, 95% of the team's backfield touches, runs into his center's ass every time, and then now a miserable spot, but seeing all the touches. So again, concentrated offense.
Yeah, he might get a touchdown, especially in a short week. You got to take the guy who's getting, 22 touches against the Bears. Yeah. Even though he didn't, he ended up with a decent yardage day, 72 yards, looks like. So the 49ers are a pass funnel, even though their pass defense is decent. I do think that the Vikings will have to throw it a lot. So I do think that, Addison and Osborne are both startable. I prefer Addison due to the touchdown equity that he's seen. Hawkinson's, fine. As you mentioned, his role hasn't changed. He led the team in targets with 8. Madison had 7 last week. Addison 5 apiece. Addison got the end zone, or got the touchdown. He had a couple touchdowns earlier in the year. Osborne has, when he has seen consistent usage, produced. So this could be a breakout game for him. But he's more of I kind of look at him as like a low talent. I shouldn't say that. Moderate talent, high volume in terms of his routes run and possible targets with Justin Jefferson out. So he's in a good spot usage wise, and he has produced in years past when he's seen 5+ targets per game.
Good spot usage wise, but miserable spot against San Francisco's defense. With that, Paulson, what else do you have for everyone coming out of the site this week?
Sneaky starts is up. Be sure to check out the breakout receiver model for week 7. Week 6 did really well. So happy to see that. Usage usually regresses to the mean, which is good for the breakout receiver model. And just keeping up on projections in a very weird week.
Reminder, it is free Discord week as well at 4for4, where you can get access to all our AMAs happening for free this week. We also may sneak in a little promo code in there for you if you want to get another discount too. So please pay attention to the 4for4 Twitter at 4for4 Football and jump into those AMAs if you have any questions, because we're there answering all of them just for you. And I'll be back Friday for the DFS show, 6 p.m. Eastern, this very channel. Until then, good luck. And remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.